trouble with it. If you're having trouble finding it or viewing it, be sure to call the school or email me so we can figure out what to do to fix it for you. Okay, well, if you remember from Friday, I told you we were going to go over the rough draft of your Federalist essay paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that tomorrow instead, because tomorrow I want to have a Zoom session with all of you so that we can discuss your paper all together. Me just talking about it doesn't really do you a whole lot of effort, do you a whole lot of good. So ask your parents to check their emails later so that way they can get the Zoom links and what we're going to do with the times for it. It will be at the same time as our normal lesson is at. So we'll contact your parents. I'll contact parents. I'm going to let them know about it just for sure. But that's part of the reason why I'm going to push it back till tomorrow instead of today. Now I remember that I didn't give you homework on Friday, so there's no homework check due for that. And because I'm moving the paper back, I'm not going to give you any homework tonight either. So you're at least left out in that regard. To where if you have your paper already done, then yeah, you don't have any other homework. If you don't have your paper done, or if you haven't read your Federalist essay yet, you need to read it, and then you need to go ahead and get it ready, because we're going to talk about it tomorrow. I'm going to ask you questions like, what is your paper about? Like for Federalist essay number 10, I read it, so I know what it's about. So we're going to talk about, figure out what are some things you can talk about in your paper, what would be a good thesis statement, if you chose 51, which I believe Genesis, you're the only one that chose 51, which is okay, that's fine. Then we'll talk about for you, okay, what is yours about? Okay, now what are some things you can include in yours? I'm going to kind of split my attention between them. So that way we can talk through what are some things you should be looking for. The paper will be due, the final draft will be due next Monday, so not today for obvious reasons, but for next Monday. You can email it to me either as a PDF or as a Word document. PDF is better because it kind of cements it in the format, so that way whenever I get it, there's no chance of it accidentally getting printed wrong from your Word copy to my Word copy. So you want to save it as a PDF. Now, of course, you still have your rough draft, so don't worry about trying to save it yet as a PDF. But whenever the weekend's coming up, if you're running into trouble over how do you save it as a PDF, you need to contact me so that way I can get it on Monday, because Monday is whenever it's due. So even though the rough draft's been pushed back till tomorrow, the final draft is still due next Monday. So just be careful, and you need to start working on it. If you haven't started working on it, you need to work on it soon. I know you potentially have a little bit more time this week, but definitely work on it. Don't just keep pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off. You need to make sure we're spending some good time on it. Alright, so you didn't have any homework, and so I remember that, but it's because I can't play review games with y'all when it's boring just asking questions. I don't want to do that over and over and over again. So I'm going to give you a little bit of classwork. Now it's going to seem like a lot, but it's not that bad. So you're going to copy the bold terms from pages 110 through 114. So instead of paying attention in class and writing down terms and definitions you don't know, we're going to give you the classwork. So copy pages 110 from the 8.3 section to page 114. It's just the bold terms, so it's not the italicized ones. I'll help you review with those. But I want you to copy down the bold terms as well as the definitions or important facts that you need to know about them. I want you to do that 2 times. This will help you to, instead of us just reviewing in class over and over again, it's just taking your class time and still using it properly, so that way you're still studying and getting that review in class. Even though I know writing down terms and definitions is not nearly as much fun as playing review games in class, and I know, and I'm sorry, but I still need you to be able to be reviewing in class. This will also save you time outside of class, so that way if you're reviewing properly during our class time, you won't have to do it as much later. And you should still study on your own, because again, I can only cover so much. But that's the reason why I'm doing the classwork, is to replace the review games that I know work way more fun. And I'm sorry, but this is just the best thing I can do for you. Alright, so page 110 to 114. That should only take you about 5 to 10 minutes, loosely, because there's not that many of them. So go ahead and pause the video and copy down the bold terms, page 110 to 114. I need it done twice, so all of them 2 times. It shouldn't take you that long. So again, 5 to 10 minutes is what you should approximate for it. Go ahead and pause the video and then do that. Once you finish that, you can go, or once it's been 10 minutes, you can unpause the video and keep going. But again, you want to get through as many of them as possible. This is your review to help you get ready, because I can't ask questions over and over again in class like you do with the review games. Okay, well hopefully you've already paused and already worked on them. So let's go ahead and let's talk through some of those review questions. And I'm going to ask them like a review style, so it's a little bit easier to kind of hear. But hopefully you've already copied these down so you can recognize and think of, okay, that was the important fact, or that was the important thing that I need to know for it. So starting at page 110, working our way forward, what do you need to know about Louis the 16th, or what do you know about that French king? Well, hopefully you wrote down that's whenever the French Revolution happened, so he was the last monarch and he died. He was beheaded. Alright, what is the Bastille? Alright, that's the French fort that was stormed by the French revolutionaries. So make a note of that, an old fort in Paris. Alright, what is the Reign of Terror? That's whenever, as your book puts it, the guillotine reigned supreme, to where they basically just had mob rule or anarchy. They started killing off a lot of their fellow Frenchmen, not just the king and queen, but a lot of other people, anyone that they didn't like basically for society. They just killed them. So, just take note, that's the Reign of Terror. And that's because the French did not have that biblical foundation like the Americans did whenever we had our war for independence. Alright. So, what does impressed mean? Now, we don't mean like, I'm impressed by your Federalist essays, like how good they are. That's not what it means. It means impressed, a different meaning in this particular context. Alright, impressed means forced, so that the British were basically impressing or impressed the Americans into service. They basically kidnapped them. They basically said, okay, you were British citizens, you are now British citizens again, and you will serve the military. So, they basically got kidnapped. Alright, what is the Jay Treaty? Oh, I skipped John Jay. Who was John Jay? Alright, hopefully you remembered, okay, he was on the Supreme Court, but for this, just make a note that he was sent to negotiate a treaty with the British. And he was the person that negotiated that Jay Treaty with the British. You make a note that it was John Jay that did it, and then it was the Jay Treaty, or they took the last name of the ambassador that was sent for the treaty. So that's why it's the Jay Treaty, it was between us and the British. And it was more one-sided, but that was the best we could do at the time because we were a young nation. Alright, who then was Thomas Pinckney? Alright, he was sent as kind of like an ambassador to Spain to negotiate a treaty with Spain. That treaty, because it was Thomas Pinckney, this is the Pinckney Treaty. So this is between us and Spain now. So we had a disputed border in the Spanish West Florida in the United States, so that way that was established. Alright, we talked about Anthony Wayne. So who was Anthony Wayne? Alright, he won the battle with the Native Americans at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. So kind of two bold terms right there. So Anthony Wayne, he beat the Indians at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. And make a note that that was the Battle of Fallen Timbers near present day Ohio. Well, Toledo, Ohio. Okay, so there were 3 states that were added at this time period. You don't have to note the years for them, but just make a note these 3 states were added. So Kentucky, Tennessee, Vermont had already been added previously at this point. So we have 15 states at this point in American history. 16 states, not just the original 13 states. Alright, talking about the farewell address. Who gave the farewell address on page 113? You said George Washington. So George Washington gave his farewell address. He warned against 3 things in particular. Do you remember what those 3 things were? Alright, entangling alliances with other nations, divisive sectionalism, and then party strife. We ended up ignoring all 3 of these later, but for right now, George Washington says, beware of these. But we didn't heed his advice. Alright, the election of 1796, that is a current date with the election that you need to know because we have multiple elections, but they're every 4 years. So this is the election of 1796. So make a note for that one. We had 4 candidates, John Adams, Thomas Pinckney, Thomas Jefferson, and Aaron Burr. So the candidates that won though were Thomas Jefferson and Adams. And John Adams. So make a note of those 2. What was the unique thing about this election though? We had a president and a vice president from 2 different parties. Make a note of that. Adams received the most votes and became president, while Jefferson became vice president. This is the only time in American history where we have a president and a vice president elected, and they're from 2 different parties. So make a note for that. That's the important thing that you need to note for them. You don't have to note individually what the 4 men were, but just make note these are the 4 candidates in the election of 1796. Alright, getting up to where we kind of left off on Friday. So, you should have defined or talked about what Charles C. Pinckney, who's the brother of Thomas Pinckney, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry, what did they do, or what were they associated with? Right, they were with the XYZ affair with the French. Now remember, the French were going through the Revolution, so they were going through multiple problems. At this point in history, the Directory had taken over the government in France. And so we sent over these 3 ambassadors basically to try to figure out, okay, we don't want to go into war with France, so we're going to try to figure out what can we do to keep the peace. The French government would not meet with our ambassadors directly, but said, for a large sum of money, we will meet with you. Well, that angered the ambassadors and angered the American people. That's what comes remembered as the XYZ affair. because they didn't want to give the Frenchmen's real names at the time. We know who they are, but they didn't want to give them at the time. So that's why the affair. This is whenever we also created the Department of the Navy. So you don't have to note the year for it. Just so you know that this is whenever the Department of the Navy was created. And when you talked about the slogan "millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute," all right, what does that mean? It's gonna be a little bit longer of a definition. All right, so it has the idea of, okay, not 1 cent for tribute. We're not going to pay a bribe, but we will give a lot of money, millions for defense. We will defend ourselves. We will pay a lot for that, but we're not just paying in for a bribe. So that's what that idea is. All right, your book points out that before the commission, they've arrived in France to try to negotiate one last time. Napoleon Bonaparte had taken over by this point, and Napoleon, even though not a good person, was at least easier to deal with than the Directory. So we were able to have an agreement, so that we did not end up going to war with Napoleon at this time period. All right, so that's the terms, the bold ones. We kind of talked through a lot of the other ideas, so hopefully that should help you get your memory kind of jogging over what we've been talking about and help you join. Now remember, if you were sitting there and you're thinking they're going, I did not write or know those, then go back, rewind the video, and then go write down any terms and definitions you don't know, which I'm sure Genesis probably can say in like game show style. But make sure that you learn them. Even though you're not in the class present with me, I still want you to do well on your exam next week. So that's why I'm trying to help get you ready as much as possible. So one of the nice things about YouTube is you can go back and rewind and hear it over and over again if you need to. So some of you that are more audio learners, if that helps you to rewind it over and over and over again, okay, that's fine. Please don't fast forward. Like, I know you can set the speed to a faster setting if you need to, but just make sure that you are listening to all the material, because again, your exams are coming up, and I want you to be as prepared as possible for it. Alright, so I know I was behind with the homework, and that's the reason why I didn't do homework on Friday, so this will give me a chance to catch up as well. So go ahead and take out your textbook, turn over to page 114. So let's go ahead and let's finish talking about that. So we talked about with John Adams, make a note of him, that he and his wife were the first president and first lady to occupy the White House. So this is the presidential administration that we're in. So we got through page 114. We're at the top of page 114 on the right side, talking about concern at home. Alright, so because we're having the French Revolution, Europe is not a fun place to be right now. So a lot of Europeans said we want to go to America, we want to live over there. It's a whole other continent away. You're not dealing with Napoleon Bonaparte or other type of revolutionary ideas over in Europe. We want to leave. Well, the Americans, the people living in America, said, well, we don't know if we want a whole bunch of foreigners coming in all at once. Now, even though that seems kind of mean, there is that logic where you don't want a bunch of foreign-born people coming in all at the same time, because you want to keep your American culture. And so because of that, you don't mind them coming in, but you don't want a whole bunch of them all at once, because if they don't know the language, if they don't know the laws, if they don't know how our currency works, it could throw off a lot of things. So while there is justifiable concern, it's something to where in this time period, they went a little bit overboard. Alright, so let's talk through this. So the Alien and Sedition Acts. Normally I would call on people around the room like Brecken, Genesis, Ethan, or Chris to read these, but I am alone. That's depressing and sad. So I have to read these. So follow along in your textbook though. So, the Naturalization Act, this increased the time a foreigner must reside in the United States before being eligible for citizenship from 5 years to 14 years. So, you might have heard of people where they have to live in the United States. Today, we typically use a visa, but it's the idea of you have to live in the United States for 5 years. That's not a problem. Even today, that is still in place. You have to live in the United States for 5 years. Now, it's not just because we don't like the immigrants, but it's because that we want them to establish to our culture and to our way of life. America is made up of immigrants, so it's not a problem being from a foreign nation. Most people understand, okay, just being foreign born is not a problem. But we want you to adapt to the culture. So that's why the Naturalization Act, you need to be able to adjust, and that's a good 5-year period, because depending where you're from in the world, it might be a big culture shock. So it's okay, you just need to adjust to it. Alright, the next one. The Alien Friends Act authorize the president to order out of the country any aliens who believe dangerous to the public, peace, suspected of treason or conspiracy. That seems a little bit harsh, But keep in mind, this is talking about an alien of someone who is not an American citizen, someone who is choosing to not be an American citizen. The president can order them out of the country if you believe that they are dangerous to public peace or suspected of treason or conspiracy. So they're saying, okay, if you come to America, but you're endangering the public, or you're committing treason, or they think that there is a conspiracy that you're involved with, well, then you're endangering the other Americans living here. So because of that, you just need to go back to wherever you're from. So again, that particular act isn't really that much of a problem. The top one, as a side note, increasing it from 5 years to 14 years, that is a bit excessive, and people in this time period understood that was a bit excessive. So people did not like that first one. It's normal to say it's about 5 years. 14 years is a bit much. So that's how come people in this time period understood that first one wasn't a good one either. Alright, so number 3, the Alien Enemies Act authorizes the president in time of declared war to imprison or banish any alien subject to an enemy power. Okay, well, if you're going to war against another nation and you are not a citizen of the country that you're staying in, and they are fighting your home country, you need to go home. You don't need to stay in a warring other nation whenever it's against your home country. You need to get home. And that's what basically that one is saying. It's just saying, look, if you're in a country and your home country is at war with the country that you're currently living in, go back to whatever country that you view as your home. If you're not an American citizen, then go back to that country. You're going to have a conflict of interest. It's going to be potentially dangerous in America because we're at war. Just go back to wherever you're coming from. So again, these are not American citizens. These are people just living in America. Whenever we're talking about an alien, it means someone that is not a U.S. citizen. So it's not someone that's lived in America now, and now they are a citizen. It's talking about any alien or someone who's living in America and they're not an American citizen. We're going to see this gets taken a little bit out of context in several wars, particularly World War II. But this is the idea of, okay, the Aliens Enemies Act, so if you're living in the United States, you're not a U.S. citizen, go back to wherever you're coming from. So just go back home because life's just unhealthy at this point. So again, that one, we would say, okay, that's fine today as well. So the second one, the third one, that's fine. Fourth one's a little bit extreme, the first one's a little bit extreme, and the part of the fourth one was a bit extreme. So the Sedition Act made it a crime to enforcement of any law or instigate a riot or insurrection. That part's fine and that's normal. The next part was whenever it was specifically targeting one group of people. However, another section made it a crime to publish false, scandalous, or malicious statements against the government, Congress, or the president. This aim was directly at Republican newspapers because Republican newspapers were talking about the Federalist officers, the Federalist elected officials. And so Congress was basically saying on purpose, you can't talk bad about it, specifically to the Republicans. Alright, so there are several parts of this that a lot of the American people at some point understood, no, these are not good laws. So Congress is making these laws and passing them, but these aren't good laws. These are going too far with the federal government. So your book points out this act stirred up deep resentment among foreign-born citizens and aliens. And your book points out as well that 25 Republican newsmen and congressmen were prosecuted, 10 were convicted for publishing and criticizing the Federalists. So James Madison was one of the people that was saying these acts of Congress should not have been passed and they're not good for the country in general. Now remember, why is it important that James Madison is saying these acts or these laws go against the Constitution? What did James Madison do? Well, hopefully you remember that he's remembered as the father of the Constitution because he helped write the Constitution. So if James Madison is saying, if these do not match up the Constitution, then he's a good authority for it because he helped write the Constitution. So he was one of the people saying these acts do not need to be here. They're too far. They're too extreme. So your book has a quote that the acts are based upon the false premise that the government officials are the masters and not the servants of the people. He's saying, okay, you're an elected official. That doesn't mean you're in charge. You should be able to view yourself like a servant because you were chosen. So you should have a spirit of humility, not say, I'm in power, I get to do whatever I want. And that's not the attitude. Thomas Jefferson also said that these acts went against the teeth of the Constitution, just saying the Constitution is supposed to be our supreme law, and these extra acts are giving it too much power. Alright, next page. This is whenever we first see the idea of state rights over who has ultimate power, the federal government or the individual states. Which one is it? Is it the federal government? Does it have more power than the states, or do the states have more power than the federal government? We're going to see this over and over and over again until about the Civil War. That's whenever the Civil War officially decides it for us. But you're going to see this idea over and over, and it's starting in this time period with Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, they wrote resolutions to different legislative branches and countries, in the different states. Just saying, okay, here's the problems with it, and what can we do about it? Madison, he wrote to the Virginia legislature, while Thomas Jefferson, he wrote to the Kentucky legislature. In Kentucky, they went a bit more extreme, and they said that the states were sovereign, and each state could judge what acts of Congress that they would keep and they would enforce. So they could basically pick and choose what acts of Congress, what laws that they would follow, because they said we willingly joined with the Constitution and we volunteered to become part of the United States of America. So we get to voluntarily choose then which laws we're going to obey and which laws we're not going to obey. Virginia wasn't quite that outspoken, but they had the same ideas behind it. Now, both of them never did anything about it, so both of them ended up enforcing these laws anyway, but the idea was the states can and they could choose which laws to follow and which laws not to follow. So that was the idea that was started in this era. Now, neither one of them actually stood up against it, but it was just the idea that, okay, we can, as a state, pick which constitutional laws we can and cannot follow. Alright, so that's the idea of the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. So make a note that this is the first occurrence of state rights. So make a note for that on the top of page 115. Alright, the election of 1800. So I remember every 4 years of a presidential election. So your book's jumping forward saying, okay, here's the next election. So we have Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr, John Adams, and Charles C. Pinckney. So those are the 4 people running at this point. So the Federalists, they chose John Adams and Charles C. Pinckney, while Thomas Jefferson, him and Aaron Burr were chosen as Republican candidate. This is the second time the Electoral College not quite work out the way that it was supposed to. Adams and Pinckney both got 65, Adams got 65, Pinckney got 64, but Aaron and Burr both got 73. Well, the Constitution says if you have a tie of electoral votes in the Electoral College, then the House of Representatives get to vote to see who becomes president. The Constitution has that worked in, saying, okay, in the event there is a tie, House of Representatives decide. But remember, there's 2 parties at this point. We have the Democratic Republicans, and we have the Federalists. Now, Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson are both Republican Democrats, Democratic Republicans, how they technically say it at this point. So the Federalists in the House of Representatives said, it's not our candidate. Our candidate is not here. We don't have John Adams or Charles Pinckney. But we can still vote in the House of Representatives. So we can basically determine who will become president if we take all of our Federalist votes and give it to one person. We can determine which person becomes president. Hamilton was kind of the leader of the Federalists during this time period, so he encouraged his Federalist Party to vote for Thomas Jefferson. Now, you might think, well, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson did not get along. No, they didn't, but Hamilton understood, okay, I don't agree with what Jefferson is doing because I'm a Federalist and this is how I think government should be run. Thomas Jefferson is a Democratic Republican, but at least I can at least respect him, and I don't like what he's doing, but I can at least respect that. So he encouraged his party to vote for Thomas Jefferson. So Aaron Burr ended up losing because Hamilton convinced his people to vote for Thomas Jefferson. So make a note for that. This is whenever the 12th Amendment gets passed, saying, okay, we need to fix the Electoral College. This is not working like we thought it would. We need to adjust this. So the 11th Amendment had already been passed. Remember, the Bill of Rights passed in 1791, so that's the first 10 amendments. The 11th Amendment addressed whether or not you could sue a state. So this is the 12th Amendment. So each elector specifies 1 vote for president and 1 vote for vice president. So this is whenever the founding fathers said, okay, we need to adjust this because we're getting weird situations and we don't like this. So we're going to say, okay, you vote for 1 vote, electoral vote for a president, 1 electoral vote for a vice president, so we don't get any more of these weird circumstances. So make a note, that's what the 12th Amendment says, and that's what it does. Just make a note for it. Alright, the midnight appointments. Well, since the Federalists knew that their party had not won, that they said, okay, we need to make sure we still don't lose too much power. We lost the presidency, but they also lost the majority of Congress to where they couldn't control Congress anymore. Too many Democratic Republicans had also been voted in at that point. They said, okay, we can fill in lots of people then in the judicial branch. That's the last branch where we can have power. So they tried to control the judiciary branch. What they did was they passed the Judiciary Act of 1801. To make a note of the full name for it, so not just Judiciary Act. So Judiciary Act of 1801. This called for the creation of 16 new federal judgeships and a new number of positions for marshals, clerks, and attorneys. Alright, just creating new federal judges, none wasn't necessarily a problem because we were a growing nation and we didn't need them. But they were trying to basically fill in as many of their own party into people of offices as they could. So that's why this becomes a little bit of a problem later on. Adams did not finish filling the new appointments until the evening before Jefferson's inauguration, so he was trying to fill them in super quick the night before. That's how come these midnight appointments are also referred to as the midnight judges or the midnight appointments. Not necessarily because he did it right at midnight, but it was the idea that he was trying to get them out as fast as possible before Jefferson becomes president, because then Jefferson is the person that fills them then. Alright, so just making a note for that. So, the Federalist legacy, we don't see the Federalist Party really after this, is pretty much it. So, the Federalists made several important contributions to the success of our new nation, dedicated to freedom and justice. They launched the new Constitution. They set the nation on a firm financial base. They established a central government. And they tried to protect the infant nation from foreign wars. Kind of 4 things that they did. That's that last paragraph, page 115. Kind of 4 things that they did to help get our nation started and to help get us going. Alright, so let's go over now to the next chapter. You've already read this. That's the reason why we're not really stopping to kind of slow down for it. This is the age of Jefferson. So as you've noticed, Jefferson was a very opinionated person, and he knew how he wanted the government to run. So, Thomas Jefferson and his successor, James Madison, they kind of have a very cultural, distinct presence with how they want to run the country. So, that's why your book focuses with Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. They run the country very similar and very same idea with the idea of a Democratic Republican, how that party kind of wanted to view the government. So, they kind of come in and they kind of revamp it a little bit. We refer to this entire age, the age of Jeffersonian politics, with the idea of the Jeffersonian era, with the idea of it's Thomas Jefferson and his ideas. Because as you can tell, Thomas Jefferson was a very opinionated individual, and he knew how he wanted things to be done. So Thomas Jefferson was the first president to be inaugurated in the new capital of Washington, D.C. Remember, John Adams had already lived in the White House, but he was the first president to be inaugurated or sworn in Washington, D.C. So it's a new capital city. Is being built, not done yet, but it's still in the process of being built. Well, let's look at the quote by Thomas Jefferson at the top of the page, 117. A wise and frugal government shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. Now, Thomas Jefferson, he said that good government should restrain people from hurting one another, should have laws and good laws for that. They shall leave them free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, saying, okay, we need to let people have free enterprise or capitalism, so that way if they want to do something for a living, they can do it. And they shall not take from them the mouth of labor the bread it has earned, saying, okay, if they've earned something good, let them have it. So that's what he's talking about with his quote at the top of page 117. Alright, so here's the timeline from the bottom of the page. We'll talk about dates you need to know as we go through it. So, with the election of 1800, power was transferred from one political party to another political party. Flip the page, so page 118. So this is whenever we have the transition of power from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson. These are 2 political parties. Remember, John Adams was a Federalist, Thomas Jefferson was a Democratic Republican. So this set the stage for having that shifting of power. Now today we have it happen so much where we have a president that is a Democrat, and the next president is a Republican, and the president maybe again a Democrat. Now we have that transition of power to where we're used to the idea of, okay, yeah, it's just the other party now. But keep in mind, in this era, having one system of government with some people how the government should run, switch and voluntarily give up their authority to another group that has a different idea or different ideas over what's important in the government, that was new. So this set an important precedent saying, okay, I might not agree with what you're doing as a Democratic Republican, but I respect that you won the presidency, so you get to be the president now. And we didn't have a civil war, and we didn't have conflict. So, just make a note that that was important for the American people, but also set the stage showing the world you can have this peaceful transfer of power as well. So, Jefferson and the Republicans continue to set examples for the conduct of the national government. So again, we call this whole era the Jeffersonian era. Make a note for that. This is one of the most important periods in American history, just because of what happens during this era, and it is really important for it. Alright, so as a Republican, I'm going to stop saying Democrat and Republican because that gets to be a mouthful after a while. So remember, the name is shortened to Republican in your book, and then your book already mentioned previously that that's a typical shorthand version for it, but this is not the same as the Republican Party today. So when I say Republican for this era, I don't mean the Republican Party today. So, many assume that this time period with the Republican victory that there would be many changes. Remember Thomas Jefferson, he was for the, he was against the loose construction of the Constitution. He didn't like the growing power of the federal government. He didn't like the national bank. So a lot of people assume now that he's president, he's going to change all of those or get rid of them. Thomas Jefferson understood though, okay, I might not like this, but it's practical and it's a good idea. And while I personally don't really like it, it's already here, so we're going to just work with it and let it go. So he said that, okay, the federals have already established this, so we're going to just keep it. I don't want to have to redo everything and tear down what they did and rebuild it. So what they did is fine. I may not personally have liked it that much or voted for it, but it's already here and it's working, so we will continue to use it. He also understood that, okay, if I completely change everything that the Federalists did, that's going to alienate them or make them feel like that I am not regarding what they view as important. So he said, okay, I need to make sure I try to blend it and try to bring our country together and not just view it as Republican versus Federalist. I need to try to keep both groups together. And so that's what he's talking about with that quote on the bottom page, well, kind of towards the middle of page 118. Every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. He's basically saying we are all Americans, and we all want the good of the country. We might have different ideas over how to run the government, but we're all Americans and we want our country to succeed. So even though we have differences of opinion, ultimately we want the same things. So that's what he's saying. We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists, we all want the same things for it. Alright, so James Madison and Albert Gallatin, those are two of his important cabinet members. If you remember, you had to learn a lot of the first cabinet members for George Washington. Here's the two major ones for him. So James Madison served as his Secretary of State. Albert Gallatin, he served as Secretary of the Treasury. Alexander Hamilton was not chosen. So Alexander Hamilton was George Washington, and that was pretty much it. So make a note, James Madison, Secretary of State, and then Albert Gallatin, he was the Secretary of the Treasury. He promoted what he called Republican simplicity. George Washington and John Adams had a lot of formality in how they ran the presidency, and he wanted it to be more of like a common man, like the common individual can do it. So he kind of switched from being more formal settings to more of an informal settings. So make it up, he replaced the formal stage reception with informal social gatherings. He, at the White House socials, rather than sitting the guests in rank, he would just sit them with the idea of that random, as opposed to you're just mixed in with other people, not the idea of ranking or putting people in a proper spot. He said it's just wherever, because it's a social gathering. He also had to where you can meet the president on a first come, first come basis. Now today, you can't do that. But in this time period, if you wanted to go talk to the president, and if you were one of the first people in line, it was first come, first served. You get to go talk to the president. It didn't matter if you were just a regular citizen, if you were a friend, if you were a foreign diplomat. That was part of what Thomas Jefferson said, I want to keep available to the people on a first come, first come basis. Now today, you can't do that because people will try to assassinate the president, but in this time period, you could. Now, he also got rid of delivering his speeches to Congress in person, partly because he didn't like public speaking, and he said it reminded him too much of the monarch doing that in Great Britain. So he would write his speeches and then give it to a messenger, and the messenger would read it to Congress. So again, just a different way of doing something. Alright, Republican officers. What were happening in a lot of states whenever you had a lot of Federalists be in power or Republicans becoming to be in power, they would basically fire or remove all of the other parties' officials or officers and replace them with people from their own party. So Thomas Jefferson was having a lot of pressure saying, okay, they were doing this on the state level, you should do it on the federal level now. Thomas Jefferson understood, this may or may not be a good idea. I don't know if I want to fire someone or remove someone from office, not the president, but a different type of federal office, just because they are of a different party than mine. that doesn't seem like a good idea in the long run. So he understood, okay, they're still a different party than me, might not agree with them on everything, but if they're doing their job, who cares if they're from a different party? So he said, okay, whenever someone retires, I will put in someone from my own party, but until we have an equal number of Republicans and Federalists. So he said, okay, I want about an equal number because there's two groups, so we should have an equal number, but I'm not going to just fire someone from being the wrong party. They're not from my party. So he said, no, we're not doing that. So just make a note though that he was saying, okay, we need to try to keep it balanced and to try to not alienate someone just because they are of a different party. So he said the better questions to ask as opposed to what party is he? Is he asking, is he honest? Is he capable? Is he faithful to the Constitution? Just saying, can they do their job well? Do they have good character? If yes, then why fire them? They're doing their job well. They might be from a different party, but just ignore that. If they can do it well, then just let it go. So that's what Dr. Becker's talking about in page 118. What is the wisdom of President Jefferson's temperament and balanced approach to appointing officials of both political parties? It keeps both parties to where they feel like that both of them are important. So even though he was a Republican, he'd say, okay, the Federalists, you're a different party, but you just have a different opinion over how to run the government. You're still an American. You still have a lot of good ideas. We just don't agree on everything. So he was saying, okay, we want to keep both parties there so that way you can get two different opinions over how the government should run. So he said, okay, we want to make sure we keep that balanced approach. And today, in a lot of cases, we have that mindset of there's two parties, and we typically get the mindset of there's a good party and a bad party. Well, just because someone is of a different party doesn't mean that they're not a good Christian or they're not a good person. They just have a different idea over how the government is run, and that's okay. They can have a different idea over how the government should be run. Unfortunately, because some parties, they stand for some ideas that are against biblical principles. That's how come most Christians are of one particular party and not the other one. It doesn't matter ultimately which party you choose, because that's your right as a Christian and as an American citizen. You should know which party you're going to vote in and why. But there is no Christian party and then a non-Christian party. We kind of get that mindset today, but that's just because over what one of the parties stands for today. But you mind in this era, and today as well, we should respect someone for their views, whether they are a Republican or a Democrat. Just because they are one or the other doesn't mean they make them a good or bad person or a good or bad Christian. As long as they know what they vote for and they're choosing it educationally, you should still respect them as a person, even if you don't necessarily agree with what their party stands for or why they're voting for it. But you should still respect them as a person and understand that, okay, people just have differences of opinion. Now you can talk to them about it, just understand that it is their choice and they're choosing to vote that way. Alright, just making up that that's what Jefferson's temperate and balanced approach in appointing officials of both parties, trying to keep both parties from being alienated or to feel like both parties feel like that they are important having those two different opinions. So it's not just one party in power and the other one is being ignored. Alright, Jefferson introduces new policies. So he said, okay, there's several things that the Federalists did that I did not like, so we're going to change several new policies. One of them was he said, okay, we have a debt. Remember the debt we had at the end of the war for independence? That debt's still there. So he was saying, okay, I need to go ahead, we need to cut down spending, try to decrease the debt as much as possible. One of the ways they did that was they reduced the number of federal employees, basically fired a bunch of them, saying, okay, your job's not needed, so we need to get rid of you and get rid of your job so we can save money. They started trying to appropriate funds, trying to figure out a better way to spend money. They also cut military and naval expenditures. This turned into a bit of a problem. Military is expensive. Hopefully, you probably know this already, that buying military weapons for a country is a lot of money, but you have to defend your country. This comes into a little bit of a trouble later on, where Jefferson is so focused on trying to cut spending that he weakens the military so much to where it becomes a bit of an issue. We'll talk about that later on. That's the reason why he's trying, or he means well, in trying to cut down the budget as much as he can. So during Jefferson's 8 years in office, the national debt was reduced from 83 million to 57 million, which we're still in the millions, but that's not bad. He cut off a lot of it. They also repealed the Naturalization Acts of 1798, restored the 5-year residence requirement for citizens, and allowed the Sedition and Alien Friends Act to expire. They also repealed the excise tax on whiskey. You might remember we talked about that several days ago. So So they let that one, they also repealed or got rid of that tax as well. They decided to leave Alexander Hamilton's overall financial program intact because they understood, okay, Alexander Hamilton was a Federalist. We didn't really like what he did, but his system works and it's putting our country on a firm financial basis. So we'll just let it go and we'll let it stay, even though it's not what I've chosen. It's working. So because that we're going to let it just stick around. They also established a military academy at West Point. This is on the west bank of the Hudson River in New York. Alright, so Supreme Court decisions. Now, with the Supreme Court, it's not John Jay as Supreme Court Justice anymore. It's John Marshall by this point, so make a note of him. So John Marshall, he had been appointed by President Adams, and he sets an important decision. Now, this is one of the early court cases, and this one is very, very important. So you have Marbury versus Madison. So remember, the verses tells you who's suing who. So this is William Marbury. He is suing James Madison. So just make a note for this one. So he's suing James Madison for it. Now, what had happened was he was supposed to get a federal appointment. Because remember, John Adams was trying to appoint all his midnight judges before the Federalists lost their power. Trying to basically put as many Federalist judges in power as much as they can. Well, his appointment didn't get to William Marbury on time. And so because of that, Jefferson said, okay, any commission that has not been given yet, withhold it, because the Federalists were trying to appoint people just to office just because they were Federalists. Well, William Marbury, he's saying, no, I'm suing James Madison, Secretary of State, because he is not giving me my appointment. The previous president wrote it for me, it just hasn't been delivered. I should get it. So that's how come it's William Marbury versus Madison. William Marbury is suing Madison, saying, I want the Supreme Court to tell Madison, give me my appointment. And that's what it boils down to, is he's asking him, saying, make him give it to me. I'm supposed to have it. So the Supreme Court was kind of stuck in a sticky situation, though, because if they said no Thomas Jefferson and the Secretary of State, James Madison, if they withheld it, it looks like the Supreme Court is basically not standing up to Thomas Jefferson. But if they say no, James Madison has to give it to him, it creates a rivalry between Thomas Jefferson and the executive branch versus the judicial branch. So they're kind of stuck in between a rock and a hard place over what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to do this? John Marshall comes with a brilliant kind of roundabout answer, which he said, I would love to help you, but this is unconstitutional. So what he said was that the Judiciary Clause was 1789, that there is a unconstitutional part of it. So even though I feel bad for you, you should get your appointment. There's nothing I can do. It's unconstitutional. This is the first time we have the Supreme Court declare something unconstitutional that Congress has done. So that's why this one is remembered as an important proceeding or an important kind of starting point. This is the first time we've ever seen this happen for it. So we call this any act of the Supreme Court to nullify an act of Congress. We call this ability judicial review. Now they call the action, we say that particular law was unconstitutional, but the ability of the Supreme Court to do that is called judicial review. Just make a note for that. So the terms sound kind of similar, so just be careful for that. So, just make a note that this is the first time we see the idea of judicial review where an act being declared unconstitutional with the decision of Marbury versus Madison. So it's John Marshall, that Supreme Court justice, that declared that. Alright, so I am now caught up with the homework, and since I gave you classwork at the start of the hour, I'll go ahead and I'll stop here for it. So you don't have homework tonight. Remember, we're going to do a Zoom meeting tomorrow going over your essays and talking through how to get you best ready for it. So have your parents check their emails later because I'll send those Zoom links to them. It should be at the same time as a regular scheduled class time. So be sure you're available at that point so that way you can come on and you can help ask questions if you need help with it, or if you need to ask something specifically, or get all the information that you need. Alright, so we'll go ahead and we'll stop there. You don't have any other homework besides to make sure that paper that you've already started working on, you want to have that rough draft written and you want to be able to have that. I'm going to tell your parents, so you can remind as well, that I need a picture of the rough draft, or you can email me a copy of the PDF or the Word document, just so I can see that you've started it. Now I'm not grading it and I'm not reading it, but I'm just checking to make sure that you have done it. So if you've already printed out your rough draft because you thought it was gonna be due today, fantastic, just take a photo of it and send it to me. Or you can send me the PDF or the Word document. I don't have to have it in a locked in format yet, because it's just the rough draft. Because that way I know that you've worked on it and you're not just bumming around at home. So make sure that you send a copy to me, either a photo, or you can actually send me the Word document tomorrow, just so that way